We just did 15 minutes together, so now I think we get about 40 minutes together. So thank you for coming back for more. I kind of want to dive a little deeper into what I was talking about out there, which is how we can actually speak in ways that are more human, that allow us to forge an emotional connection with our audience. And so I just thought, with the time I have here, to share some of the tips that I share in the book, which is on sale in the back. Thank you for being here again. This is the real life of a speechwriter. This is a real episode that happened. We were in Athens, Greece, towards the end of administration. The audience was thousands of people were in their seats ready for the speech. The speech was, the president was backstage ready to give the speech, but the speech was written and trapped on my computer with no Wi-Fi. So that's the look of a speechwriter, realizing you're holding up a presidential speech, a presidential trip, and pretty sure you're going to lose your job. But there's always a nice tech person to help you keep your job. I want to start by just asking you, and if this were a workshop, we'd be writing it down, but just take a moment to think about how you describe what you do in your work. When someone asks you, what do you do? You're at a cocktail party, you're on the street, you're talking with a family or friend, and they say, what do you do? They might know where you work, but what do you actually do? How do you describe that? How do you convey how you spend your time? And I just want you to think about that a little bit, because I'm going to come back to it throughout the course of the workshop. And what I want to do here is kind of just share 9 tips from the book that I think can help us find better ways to talk about who we are, what we do, what we value, the difference we're trying to make in the world. The first lesson that I want to share from the book for you is something I call the 50-25-25 rule. And before I tell you what it is, I want to tell you why I think it's important. So I think someone tells you have to give a presentation. It could be a work presentation, it could be a toast, an anniversary, a retirement, speaking in your community, speaking at a rally. A blank page can be very terrifying. The cursor blinking at you, taunting you, give me words. So I think a big mistake that a lot of us make, and I've made it many times in my life, which is to just start writing. Just putting something down on the page makes you feel better. Now you don't have a white page anymore. Suddenly you have words. I think there's a problem with that, though, and I think I've encountered it many times during the course of my work, which is you can actually write a lot and have it make no sense. You can produce a slide deck of 100 slides, and there have been times when I've worked with clients and they show me their 80 slide deck, and I ask them, what is this presentation about? And they can't tell me. They can't answer that question that I just asked you a moment ago. What do you do? What are you trying to accomplish? And so oftentimes I think we tend to write and create and produce and design before we've truly thought, before we do the deep thinking that only we as humans can do. And I've seen this more and more in some of the clients. They know they want a speech, they know they want an essay about something, so they just ask ChatGPT to write it, and then they send it to me. I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do with this? It's there, but it's not in your voice. I can tell it's written by a machine. It doesn't reflect your values. It doesn't reflect your humanity. I know you as a person. None of your humanity and your personality is captured in this. And so I share this because one of the first things we often did with President Obama whenever he had a big speech, like those speeches in Germany, is we'd go up, sit with him in the Oval Office, and just spend some time thinking. And it was really wonderful because you imagine he's going to give a major speech in Europe. Who should be in that room if you think about it? Maybe our Europe experts, maybe our nuclear experts, maybe our Russia experts. You could fill an auditorium with people who in theory should be having a say in that. But he deliberately kept these really small because he just wanted a quiet place where he could think through deeply what he wanted to say and the message he wanted to communicate to his audiences. We called these the downloads because he would just riff. Sometimes he'd come to these meetings and he would have a clear sense of the headline that he wanted to get out of the event. Other times he came with his yellow notepad. He had been working overnight, and he might have 5 points already laid out. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. So there's a way I think all of us can do this in our own life, which is no matter how much time you have to prepare for a presentation, a speech, a toast, whatever, whether it's a month, a few weeks, a week, a few days, a few hours, just set aside the first 50% of your time or so to think. You don't have to write anything right away. You don't have to start creating slides and designing things and coming up with cute logos and catchy graphics because you haven't thought deeply about what you want to say. And then maybe about 25% of your time writing. I find that, I'm called a speechwriter, but I spend far more time thinking and researching and outlining and planning and playing with ideas than I ever do writing. And I find that the writing and the creating comes so much easier when you do this work, when you give yourself the space to just think without the burden of having to create something and coming up with the perfect words. And then the last 25%, you really want to connect. This is the part I think most people just overlook, especially in business and everyone's busy. Set aside maybe 25% of your time just to practice, just to edit. I've worked with clients and the CEO has to give the speech at 6 o'clock Friday night, and it's 4 o'clock and no one's seen the speech. And then it finally gets shared. Hey, what do you think of the speech? Well, at that point, it is what it is. There's no changing that speech. And who's going to raise their hand and say to the boss, this is terrible. This is going to hurt the company, and you should not say this. You've got 2 hours. It's too late. But I think, great leaders, great communicators build in time to edit and practice. And we would do this with the president, too. Oftentimes we wouldn't give him a draft till 2 or 3 days out. But for the big ones, we'd give it to him a week or 2 out. The President of the United States is making time to do the hard work that goes into it. I think our presentations are better and more human when we actually go through some version of this. I think these are the three big steps. Part of that is something I call know your 10 words. One of the things that he would say to us in these meetings, the very first thing he would say, before we got into all the details and all the policy and all the minutia, the wonkery, he'd say, what's the story we're trying to tell here? And he didn't mean like make up a story. He meant, what's the story we're trying to tell our audience? What is the one message we're trying to leave with the audience? Audiences can't remember 10, 12 things, but they can remember 1 or 2 or 3 really powerful points. He wanted to make sure that we knew what the powerful point was. Those of you who work in large organizations or bureaucracies where you have to share a presentation or a speech with the lawyers and the marketers, and everyone gets a say and a chop. If you don't know the one thing, the one message that your boss wants to convey, then you have no way to navigate that process. It can become hell. Why should this edit be accepted and the other edit be rejected? Well, if you don't know what your boss wants, just accept them all. He was very good about distilling a 40-minute speech into one sentence. And so I say know your 10 words is before you ever start writing things, creating things, just ask yourself, in one sentence or so, what is this presentation about? What's the one thing I want the audience to remember? If you could tell the journalists the headline that you wanted, and of course you can't, but if you could tell a journalist the headline, what's the headline you would want out of this? And headlines are short, 10 words or less. So when people ask you what you do for a living, what your organization does, do you give them a 20-minute explanation? Or can you boil it down, distill what you do down to 10 words or less? So when people ask you what you do you drone on? Do you go on for 20 minutes? Or can you boil it down distinct to 10 words or less? And when you do that, there's something else that the president would often say to us. And I should say, by the time I started working for him, I'd been a speechwriter for about a decade. So I kind of felt like I knew what I was doing. I got hired. But he would, as we were done with these conversations in the Oval Office, he'd often say something to us. He'd say, make good luck with your writing. Make sure it has a beginning, a middle, and end. And I'm like, what? And all his campaign speechwriters were like, yeah, boss, absolutely, great. And I'm thinking, yeah, absolutely, you got it, beginning, middle, and end. And I'm thinking, what is he talking about? Of course, you start speaking, you keep speaking, you stop speaking, beginning, middle, end. How I had never thought of writing or speech writing that way. But he did, and I think it's interesting, right? He was a writer, he was an author before he ever entered politics. He had a deep appreciation for narrative arc and the essential elements of storytelling, and I think a great speech, a great presentation does have all the elements of a great story, which we all know because we all love stories and plays and books and movies, and they have clear arc, and I think great presentations, great speeches also have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And I see these things online sometimes where, especially I told you, I love LinkedIn. Let's connect on LinkedIn. But, there's like every great presentation has 14 key elements. If you don't have the 14 key elements, your presentation sucks. I'm like, what? I wish someone told me about this. I never knew there were 14 essential elements. I think that's making it a little bit too complicated. I think every speech that I can think of, we wrote over 3,000 speeches for the president in those 8 years. Every single one of them, in one way or another, clearly laid out a problem, clearly laid out the solution that we thought would solve that problem, and we painted a vivid picture of the world and how it would be different if you adopted that solution. And I think that's true for products and services, and I think a lot of times, you might have one but not the other two. And so this was something that I probably shouldn't have taken me so long to learn, but it was something that the president stressed with us over and over. He wanted to make sure every speech had a clear beginning, middle, and end. And when I teach this to my students at American University, I often we spend 3 weeks writing one speech, and 1 week we do the beginning, 1 week we do the middle, and 1 week we do the end. And then we look at it and we smooth it all out. But to think deeply about how you're guiding the audience through a journey. When people ask you what you do, what your organization does, are you clearly laying out a problem, clearly laying out the solution that you offer, and the change that you and your organization can bring? That's a great way to frame the work you do. The danger of data. I get a lot of pushback from people on this, and maybe I will here today. I just want to give you an example. Now, this is Greta. We all know Greta. She's inspired millions of people all around the world with very passionate speeches, very, very eloquent speeches. What I'm about to show you was not one of them, by her own admission. Now, we do have I have a few clips I want to share with you. Hopefully it's going to work. All right, I think it's going to work.
In chapter 2, on page 108, in the SR 1.5 IPCC report that came out last year, it says that if we are to have a 67% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, we had, on January 1st, 2018, 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit in that budget. And of course, that number is much lower today, as we emit about 42 gigatons of CO2 every year, including land use.
All right. Thank you for the help with the video. That was perfect. Raise your hand if you understood clearly what she was saying. I don't usually get too many hands. I got a few. Raise your hand if you were inspired by what she said. Struggle. Now, I'm not trying to pick on Greta. She gave an interview a few weeks after that speech, and she said, I basically only spoke about facts and numbers, and then people watched it, and I felt like no one understood a word I said. So she had this great global moment, great opportunity to connect with people on a human level. And I think that's an extreme version, but I think one of the biggest mistakes as speakers and presenters is we think if we just hit folks with a few more numbers, a few more stats, we will win them over. We will persuade them. We will convince them with the irresistible logic of our statistics. And that's just not how it works. We know from research that's not how it works. One of the professors that I quote in the book is Tali Sharot out of London. Numbers and statistics are necessary and wonderful to discover the truth, but they are not enough to change beliefs and virtually useless for motivating action. I think it's a really important thing to think about. Think of the values and the core beliefs that you have that are most important to you, maybe politically, culturally, economically. When was the last time someone really changed your mind about something important by throwing a lot of numbers at you? If you're trying to persuade people, connect with them, this isn't the way to do it. I'm not saying no numbers ever. I use statistics. I'm about to use some statistics in a moment to undermine the value of statistics. I get the irony. But I think that's something we have to be really mindful of as speakers, is that we're not loading our audiences up with too much, especially when we have moments like this, right? I'm giving you a presentation. There's no script for you to follow along with, right? If I threw 20 numbers at you, unless you're taking notes, there's no way for you to retain that. This is an auditory experience, right? When a human is in front of a group of humans, it's an auditory experience. And we just can only process so much. And I think we forget that, particularly in academia and business. We really have to be careful of not, bombarding our audiences with too much. When people ask you what you do you throw lots of numbers at them? I think it's something to be mindful of. Again, I'm not saying none, but too much is too much. So what is the answer? Well, we know from a few, 100,000 years of human experience that the best way to connect with another human being is to tell them a human story. And now I'm going to use statistics to make my point. There's a real study that was done at the University of Pennsylvania a few years ago, and you don't have to read it. And there was a real food crisis going on in Africa. And they brought in groups of people and gave them real money, and then presented different groups with different kind of pitches. One was very heavy on statistics. You wanted to show the group how big a problem it is, right? If you want people to give money, show them it's a big problem. Big problems need big money, right? That's a great way to get people to give. The other group were they were given sort of a more emotional human pitch about one child and what that one child needed. Which do you think raised more money? Anybody? Does anybody think the one on the left, the statistical pitch, raised more money? I know, I already gave it away. Okay, this is not why I'm showing you this. So I think we know that this is sort of the secret of great fundraising, great NGOs, great charities. That's not the reason I show you this. I show you because there was actually a third group in this study where they did what we used to do at the White House. It's like, we know the power of human stories, but we still want you to know this is not about one child. It's about a big problem that's affecting millions of people. So for this third group, they kept the story of the girl, but then they interlaced it with all sorts of statistics. So you think you're going to get the best of both worlds. It's going to go up. In fact, the donations went down. And I found this fascinating. And so much so that I actually reached out to the researcher to ask, and she said something that I think was both simple but kind of profound. It's hard for humans to generate feelings towards statistics. You're asking someone to join your cause, join your company, join your military, join your movement, join your party. One of the most powerful things you can do is tell them a human story. And this quote is attributed to Mother Teresa. I don't think she ever said it. I've never been able to find a definitive source. It's one of those things like Abraham Lincoln said, you got to be careful what you hear on the internet. But it's such a powerful quote, and I think this is our challenge as communicators and leaders. If I look at the mass, I will never act, she supposedly said. If I look at the one, I will. Our job as communicators is to make your audience think of the one. Think of the one person, the one family, the one community that you can help, that you can make a difference in. Tell that story. And in the United States, we have St. Jude Research, which raises money for childhood cancer. And if any of you have ever seen one of their commercials in the United States, I went and visited them to learn how they do it. And it was fascinating. The man who leads their fundraising, he said, listen, we've got a phenomenal story to tell about science and clinical trials and life expectancy and survival rates. But when it comes time to try to bring people into our cause and inspire them and motivate them, we don't talk about any of that. They tell one story about one child. And I mean, these commercials are heartbreaking. But that's the reason that they have raised billions, with a B, billions of dollars to fight childhood cancer. These people are master storytellers. And I think, great leaders in the end are master storytellers. Again, when you are talking about what you do, what your company does, are you telling stories about the people that you help? Are you making it real and vivid to your audience? Or do you speak in abstractions like so many organizations do? I think, great leaders are great storytellers. Related to this, and I've alluded to this in the earlier presentation, I think great communicators, when you really want to connect with someone, is to say what only you could say. This is one of our mantras in the speech writing world. People come to me and say, I have to give a speech, I have to give a presentation, I have to give a keynote, I have to speak at an all-hands meeting. What should I say? And I say, well, not to be flippant, but you should say what only you should say. You shouldn't sound like everybody else. If there's 5 speakers, you shouldn't just be repeating what they say. I'll give you a story that illustrates this. So one of the first jobs that I had after the White House was I worked on the bid committee between the Canadians, the Mexicans, and the Americans to bring the World Cup to North America. So we had to go to FIFA and make the case. We were told we would have 16 minutes to make our pitch. No pun intended. 16 minutes to make our case to FIFA. And we had like 7 speakers. And it was decided that rather than have all the old men who run the federation speak, wouldn't it be more interesting for the audience and for everybody if we had one young dynamic athlete from every country, all the 3 countries, get up and speak? And so the moment we decided this, the Canadians said, this is going to be our presentation. The Canadians said, we know exactly who we want to speak for us. We want this young man. And those of you who are from Munich know who this is? Davis. All right, Alfonso Davies. He plays for Munich now. At the time, he was 17 years old. He's from Canada. And I didn't know anything about him, which horrified my son, who's a huge football fan. Hi, Dad, how could you not know Alphonso Davies? So, but the moment I heard his life story, I understood immediately why the Canadians were so passionate about him speaking for them. And so in this case, we can actually play his entire speech because he was only given 1 minute. 1 minute. How do you say anything important in 1 minute? Here's how he used his 60 seconds.
Sure. It's a great honor to speak to you today. My name is Alphonso Davies. My parents are from Liberia and fled the Civil War. I was born in Ghana in a refugee camp. It was a hard life. But when I was 5 years old, a country called Canada welcomed us in. And the boys on the football team made me feel at home. Today, I am 17 years old, and I play for the men's national team, and I'm a proud Canadian citizen. And my dream is to someday compete in the World Cup, maybe even in my hometown of Edmonton. I played matches in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. The people in North America have always welcomed me. If given the opportunity, I know they'll welcome you. Thank you.
He's such a competitive guy. He didn't even use his whole 60 seconds. That was 55 seconds. By the way, one of the most important things you can do as a speaker and a leader is smile. And I am stunned that so many speakers forget to do this. Before you ever say a word, your smile can help you connect with an audience in a way that a machine will never do. The kid's got a great smile. And I want you to think about what he did there, right? If he'd gotten sick that morning and couldn't do it, we couldn't have just given that speech to somebody else to read. It wouldn't have made any sense. It was so unique. It was so personal. No one else, there's 8 billion people in the world. No one else on the planet could have read that speech and have it make sense. It was so unique and personal to him. And also think about, what did he do there? Problem, solution, change, result. There's a problem. We want the World Cup. Solution, give us the World Cup. Change, benefit. I play in the World Cup in my hometown of Edmonton. It's that simple. Even in something like that, it's that simple. It's all there. So I think when someone asks you, this is especially important when you're on a panel, when you're one of many speakers, what can you say and share from your own life, the stories, the experiences that no one else can bring to the table, that you know that no matter what every other speaker says, you will be original, you will be authentic. Those are the speakers that stand out. Think of the speakers who have stood out in your last 48 hours here, the ones you remember. I guarantee you they're the ones who gave you something truly unique and didn't speak in abstractions or concepts. I think that one of the most important ways to do this is to recognize the power of only. What can you say about your organization, your service, your product that nobody else can say? I've worked with clients sometimes and go through this exercise with them, and they come back to me and said, we've thought about it, and we realize, there's really nothing we can say that we do that other places don't do. I said, okay, that's not a messaging problem, that's a mission problem, right? That you haven't found, why should someone donate to you, volunteer for you, go work for you, if they can go to work 10 other places? This is when people ask you what you do, what can you say that no one else can say about your life, about the work that you do? As you do all this, I beg you to talk like a human being. People laugh, this should seem like a low bar, and yet so many of us miss it every day. I'll give an example. One of the very first speeches I ever had to write for President Obama was a cybersecurity speech. Now, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but we had tons of cybersecurity experts at the National Security Council, and they had just written a phenomenal 300-page report about cybersecurity and all the things we should do. And they had a whole beautiful section about how we need to be prepared in advance for attacks, just like we prepare for floods and hurricanes and storms. Makes sense to me. So me and my non-cybersecurity brain, I wrote something like this. Just as we do for natural disasters, we have to have plans and resources in place beforehand. Short, simple, English, I get it. It's pretty straightforward. I think most Americans, most people around the world get that. Well, I circulated the speech. The experts got it. God bless their heart. And they changed this line to this. Implementation of this framework will require developing reporting thresholds, adaptable response and recovery plans, and necessary coordination, information sharing. And I can't even say it. I'm running out of breath. What they were doing, they were just going back, they cut and pasted from their report. Now, so I did the only responsible thing that any speechwriter and communicator could do. I reached out to them, I worked with them, I worked through every word, and I came up with a consensus compromise. I didn't do any of that, actually. I just ignored it and went put the sentence back. There is no saving this. That's not talking like a human being. Even the expert, I guarantee the experts who wrote that, when they go to the bar at night and then someone asks them what they do, they don't say that. And yet we see language like this all the time in government, in business, in NGOs. I love NGOs. My God, NGOs, we've got to learn to speak in English. We've got to learn to speak like a human being. Another thing to be aware of is the acronyms. We live, I think, every sector, every industry, we have jargon that we think is meaningful, that we think makes us sound smart. I think we need to be very, very careful about using acronyms. I had a client once who said, if 90% of my audience understands what I'm saying, that's good enough for me. And as a speechwriter, that broke my heart. Because they don't want 90%, because in the 10%, you say something and 10% of your audience doesn't understand it, in that 10% could be your next donor, your next investor, the employee that's looking for a place. And if the people can't understand you, they can't donate to you, invest in you, partner with you, buy from you. And we think people know the acronyms that we're using, but so often, this is a real story. Our state of Wisconsin had a travel federation that they sometimes acronyms don't send the message you think they're sending. So I think that's another thing we need to be aware of. Not everyone in your knowledge knows what you know. And I think we get caught up in our own jargon and our own language, and we forget that there are people in that audience who are trying to reach. And this is one of the most common mistakes I think that speakers make. What I teach my students, what I use in my life, and what I include in the book is something I call the barbecue rule. So you go to a barbecue with your family and friends. And who's at a barbecue like that when you're with your family? Young people, old people, people from all sorts of different backgrounds, right? Smart people, not so smart people, very highly educated people, less educated people, old and young. Someone in your family asks you, what do you do for a job? And you respond with something like, well, thank you for asking. I utilize next generation innovations to create synergies that optimize technology for positive health outcomes. That's the kind of language we see all the time in government and business and NGOs. If you start talking like that at your barbecue, your family's like walking away. They're grabbing a drink. This is painful to listen to. But we know not to talk like that when we're with our family and friends. Why do we talk like this in settings like this or in business? We think that this is the way to communicate. I would hope you'd say something like, we make watches that monitor your heart rate and share that information with your doctor so you can stay healthy. English, German, English, whatever it is. Something that's simple and clear that everyone can understand, from your grandmother down to your teenager niece or nephew. When we wrote State of the Unions, there's a university in the United States that grades State of the Union speeches. And they run it through their little, probably now AI. And they give it a grade. This speech was written at the grade 8, 9, 10 level, for the American education system. And they found that most State of the Union addresses are written at about the 8th grade level. And I think there's a reason for that. Now, having worked on some of these speeches, we never sat there and go, okay, that sentence is 10th grade, make it more 8th grade. We didn't do that, but we were very deliberately, every single sentence, trying to make it as clear as possible to as many people as possible. It just so happens that in the United States, for better or worse, the average reading level is at about the 8th grade level. So, you can't expect your audience to understand and be motivated and be inspired and to do the work you're asking them if they can't understand you. But I think a lot of leaders make this mistake. We get caught up in all of this jargon, all of these words that we think mean something. We align our bandwidths and we focus on core competencies, and then we dialogue issues to try to incentivize people, and on and on and on. And synergy. Don't get me started on synergy. No one talks like this over a coffee or a beer. But we get into corporate world and the NGO world. The answer, I'm thrilled to say that for every single one of these words, there is a normal word to use, plain English, plain German. You find yourself using, and I have a whole page of this in the book. of words to try to get us to be talking like humans again. And it really comes down to something very simple. Use everyday words. Is this a word? Is this a sentence? Is this something I would say to someone on the street or at my family and they're asking you how your day was? When people ask you what you do, are you using jargon or are you using everyday words that everybody can understand? Number 7, there's only 2 more. I encourage you to speak from your heart. This is something I talked about earlier. Again, audiences don't want machines. They don't want scripts and presentations prepared by machines. We come together to have a human experience. They want your authenticity, your originality. They want all of this, only what you can say. And I'm going to, since I picked on Greta a little bit at the beginning, I'm now going to give an example, and you probably know which one this is, of a phenomenal speech she gave, actually just around the same time as that other speech. This one went viral around the world. You've probably seen it. You may know which one it is. But contrast it with what I just showed a few minutes ago. We'll see if it plays. So she's asked, what's your message to our audience today, Greta?
My message is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
So that went viral. And ask yourself, why did that go viral? Why? And I have to say, I love it when something goes viral, like a speech, because there's speeches and presentations given every single day all over the world. But just every once in a while, something goes viral. What does that mean? That means that millions of people, that connected with people at a human level so much that they liked it, they clicked it, they shared it, they wanted their friends and family to hear it too. That's what going viral means. And what she did there is such a profound contrast to what she did in that other speech. She brought the full measure of her heart, of her humanity, as a young person, what she cares about. That's the reason that stood out, and the other one did not. The last 2 quickly. I think great leaders, great communicators ultimately offer a vision. I talk, again, problem, solution, change, result. How is the world going to be different and better because of what you are offering, your product, your service, whatever? In the United States, we have a vision statement. It's called the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. It was not true when it was written, in the sense that we certainly didn't treat people that way, and it has taken and continues to take more than 2 centuries to try to live up to that vision. You have a vision here in Europe of a Europe that is more integrated, more connected than ever before, and that is an ongoing process. Both of these are processes without end. Every great, there's that internet guy again. Every great political movement that we've had in the world, in the United States, is because someone offered them a powerful vision. You know, the abolitionist movement was a vision of an America without slavery. The suffragette movement was an America where women could vote. MLK, Reagan, they all offered powerful visions. And you think about what people will do to realize a vision. People marched, people risked their lives, gave their lives. They were beaten, they were jailed, they were killed because someone offered them a vision that was so powerful, they were willing to lay their lives down for it. Not a number, not a statistic, but a powerful vision. It's true for companies, whether you're Steve Jobs or Khan Academy or Tesla. These are companies that offer powerful visions of a world that is different if you work with them. And so I ask you, when people ask you what you do, are you offering a clear picture or vision of how your community, your company, your state, your region, your world is different because of that? Great, that's what great communicators do. And then finally, the final lesson I want to share with you is, I think there's really only one way to end any sort of presentation of any kind. I don't care who you are, who your audience is, what you're talking about. There's only one way to end, and you've got to end with hope. Because you are bringing people together to ask them to think or act differently in their lives somehow. And it only works if you can give them hope that is actually realistic, actually achievable. And there's actually science to back this up. Tali Sharot, the neuroscientist that I mentioned to you earlier, she and others have spent, some of you may have heard about this, they've spent years studying how we as human beings think about the past, the present, the future. And they have found that over and over again in studies and research and surveys, we tend to overestimate the likelihood that good things will happen to us. I'm going to get married. I'm going to propose. She's going to say yes. I'm going to get the job. I'm going to get the promotion. We know that all these things don't necessarily happen, but we believe they will over and over. And on the flip side of that, we tend to underestimate the likelihood that bad things will happen. I'm not going to get cancer. I'm not going to get divorced. I'm not going to lose someone I love to an accident. And yet, statistically, a lot of these things are going to happen to us in our lives. But that's not how we, as humans, most humans, see the world. Most humans have what they call an optimism bias. And she had this beautiful phrase in one of the articles that she wrote that sort of biologically, neurologically, she believes that on some human basic level, we're just hardwired for hope. It's the only way to explain how we persevere against just unbelievable odds, how all those activists and advocates marched and protested and made progress in the world. And I mention this because I think as communicators and as leaders, this gives us a superpower, right? By the way, it's interesting. They found that about like 80% of people across cultures and demographics have the optimism bias, which means about 20% don't. I think we know who those 20% people are in our companies and our lives. No matter what you propose, there's always a downside. But most people out there, if you accept this, then our job as leaders and communicators is to tap into this deeply human optimism bias and know that our audience is ready to do the work, they're ready to change, they're ready to work hard, they're ready to sacrifice and put in the effort to achieve those goals that you've laid out in your presentation. And I'll just, again, when people ask you what you do, when you paint that vision of the future, are you giving them hope that change and success is possible, that you can save lives, that you can cure diseases, that you can make life a little bit better, that you can alleviate some suffering? That's one of the most powerful ways you can connect with another human being and bring them into Course Your Work. And I'm just gonna, these are just some of the 9 lessons that I shared with you today. There's much more in the book. And I just want to leave you with an example of sort of hope that, and I shared earlier the speech of President Obama when he came to Berlin the first time. And I thought what a great way to end. It was the very last speech he ever gave here in Europe, and was in Germany. We came for the Hanover mess at the end of the administration, and these were his final words to the people of Germany and the people of Europe as he prepared to leave office.
And I know that some will call it blind hope when I say that I am confident that the forces that bind Europe together are ultimately much stronger than those trying to pull you apart. But hope is not blind when it is rooted in the memory of all that you've already overcome. Your parents, your grandparents. So I say to you, the people of Europe, don't forget who you are. You are the heirs to a struggle for freedom. You're the Germans, the French, the Dutch, the Belgians, the Luxembourgers, the Italians, and yes, the British, who rose above old divisions and put Europe on the path to union.
This was 2016.
You're the Poles of solidarity and the Czechs and Slovaks who waged a velvet revolution. You're the Latvians and Lithuanians and Estonians who linked hands in a great human chain of freedom. You're the Hungarians and Austrians who cut through borders of barbed wire. And you're the Berliners who on that November night finally tore down that wall. You're the people of Madrid and London who faced down bombings and refused to give in to fear. And you are the Parisians who later this year plan to reopen the Bataclan. You're the people of Brussels in a square of flowers and flags, including one Belgian who offered a message, we need more. More understanding, more dialogue, more humanity. That's who you are. United, together. You are Europe. United in diversity. Guided by the ideals that have lit the world, and stronger when you stand as one. As you go forward,
maybe some of you were there, I don't know. But that was the final words to the people of Germany and the people of Europe, and encapsulated so many of the lessons that I've tried to share with you today. I hope you find them useful in your work no matter what you do. And I just want to say one last thing, and I mentioned I traveled to more than 40 countries with the president. And one of the things I love to do is not stand in the back of the room and watch him give the speech. I could watch the video of him later. I love to work my way up and sit in the front corner so I could watch the faces of the audience. I wanted them to know, I wanted to see whether they were having the reaction, the experience that we had imagined back in our little White House office weeks before, because we were trying to create an experience. I was trying to see, was this man, this person, this leader, connecting with them on a human level? Were they nodding? Were they listening? Were they following along? And so I've seen these lessons that I've shared with you today work all over the world. I know there's unique ways that different people in different communities and demographics and cultures communicate with each other, but I still do think there's just some fundamental human ways that we can connect. I saw him do it. It worked for him, and it can work for you too. So I hope you find it useful.